is Lysing. I'm your host Liam, aka Himbar, and today I'm going to be telling you all the books I read in autumn. Well, I also will just start this by saying that I know autumn is not over, but I just put it in nice little 3-month blocks just to make it easier on me. So these are the books I read in September, October, and November. And so just real quick, I read 10 in September, 18 in October, and 11 in November. I also read 2 nonfiction books, which I believe I finished both in September. I read more nonfiction, I just haven't finished nonfiction books. So that comes out to about 40 books if I did my math correctly. Might be 41, I don't know. Anyways, yeah, it was some great reading, so I'm just gonna get right into it. I didn't get out stacks of books like I have in the past. I'll just try to edit them all in. I'll probably regret that later. Editing Liam will not like present Liam. So anyway, so in September, the first book I read was The Story of the Glittering Plain by William Morris. This is a very early fantasy novel from the 19th century. William Morris is known for a lot of things like his textile work, his arts and crafts movement, the socialism, nationalism, but also his prose romances, which are heavily influenced on Tolkien, among other authors. I love his poetry as well. If you keep up with the channel, you'll realize that this review actually should have come out 2 days before this video, and so that is how far behind I am on my reviews. You also notice that some of these books do have already come out, but that's because I inserted them at the top of the review list rather than putting them in order, and that was for specific reasons, which I'll mention, I guess, when I get to those. So, Story of the Glittering Plain, that was lots of fun, standalone, very short. So, and then I read The Wheel of the Infinite. That was the buddy read for September, actually. That is by Martha Wells. I was a little underwhelmed by this one, but I mean, it was okay. I did that one. That review is up because it was a buddy read. I wanted to get it out sooner rather than later, though it still was a little late. And then Paladin of Souls, I read, so that review is coming out pretty soon as well. It's already recorded. That one is a sequel of sorts to The Cursed Challion, which I never did a review for because I read it before I started this channel. I love The Cursed Challion. Paladin of Souls, I did not enjoy as much, honestly, though I believe it won a Hugo, but it just didn't work so well for me. But it was still fine. There was still a lot of good stuff about it. Then I read Babel by R.F. Kuang. That review came out months ago because it was relatively new at the time, so I just wanted to get it out when there was more interest going on about it. This is probably my least favorite read of the year as far as reads that are purely fiction go. And then I reread The Two Towers by Tolkien. I think I read The Fellowship of the Ring as like my last book in my for my summer wrap-up, so yeah, anyways, great as always. I don't know what else to say about that. And then I read Paralandra, which is the second book in the Space Trilogy by C.S.LEWIS. That review is also recorded. That'll come out soon. But it was a fun time. Very weird and cool. And then The Return of the King. I read that as well, reread. As far as then, I read another Warhammer book with my brothers. This is The Solar War. I skipped a bunch of books because I read one Warhammer book before. This is like the end of the Horus Heresy stuff. It was pretty wild, I suppose. I'm going to record a review for this one soon. I don't actually have a lot to say, so we'll see what I come up with. And then I read Cartwright's Cavaliers by, oh, how am I blanking on this? It's by someone. I feel bad now. Anyways, this book was free on Kindle, actually. Yeah, I don't remember. Anyways, it was pretty good, actually. I enjoyed it. It was a little different. I'll mention what was different about it in my review, but it wasn't bad. It was the first, I think it's generally the starting point for the Four Horsemen universe, which is published by Chris Kennedy Publishing. Yeah, so not bad at all. Oh, Wandry's the guy who wrote the book. I'm blanking on his first name. Anyways, and then I finally finished The Forge of Virtue, which I'd actually started in August, and it took me a while to finish. That is an an Ultima book, and by Lynn Abbey. I enjoyed that one quite a bit. Abby is a very character-focused writer, and she is just one I'm a fan of. I think it works a little better in short stories, but this is a rather short novel still. So, and then on October, again, I read 18 books. So the first one I finished was Time with the Twins by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman. I will have a review for this one, of course, at some point. My first Dragonlance novel, first Dragonlance novel since I finished the Dragonlance Chronicles last year. I have read one other Spelljammer technically, but it is set in the Dragonlance world of Krynn. And so this one was pretty interesting, and overall it was actually better than Dragons of Autumn Twilight, which was my favorite of the Dragonlance Chronicles. Though there's different things going on, definitely different feel about this one, and it's interesting. I have things to say. So, and then I read I the Sun. The review is up for this one because, again, it was the buddy read for October. This is by Janet Morris. This is a historical novel, biographical novel, about a Hittite king thousands and thousands of years ago, and it was pretty wild, honestly. So if you like historical fiction, especially historical fiction from the ancient world, and maybe particularly a novel from a place that is not Mesopotamia, Greece, or Egypt, though it's near all of those, maybe check this one out. Morris is a really good writer. So, and then the narration is actually done by her husband, Christopher Morris, so that is pretty well done as well. And then this one also has come out. I released it on Halloween. This is Carmilla by Lefanu. I'm blanking on his first names right now. Anyways, this is a 1870s, if I'm remembering correctly, gothic vampire novel. That would have released before Bram Stoker's Dracula. It's better than Bram Stoker's Dracula for a few reasons, in my opinion, that I share in my review. One of them, though, is that it's shorter. It doesn't waffle on a lot. So, but it is pretty interesting and entertaining. And since it's so short, I believe there's 2 free versions of it on Audible. There's not a lot of reasons not to read this one. And then I read Dawnrise, which will not have a review because I have not reviewed the first 4 books in this series. Maybe I'll make a video on the series at some point. But this is the 5th and final book in the Chaos Queen Quintet by Christopher Husberg. I read the first 4 a while ago. I read Feared Stars, the 4th book, whenever it was released, but I hadn't read Dawnrise, and finally I was like, you know what, I should finish this because I got them all signed by Chris Husberg at FanX in September. And so I was like, you know what, I'm going to finish this now. And so I did. I really enjoyed it, actually. There's a pretty cool breaking of the 4th wall at the end of the book. So yeah, I liked it. Hopefully Chris writes some other stuff. So he hasn't released anything since then, but hopefully we'll see more from him. And then I read She, A History of Adventure by H. Rider Haggard. This is a fun, romantic adventure novel from 1880s? Might be the 1890s. It's pretty sneaking awesome, to be honest. It's kind of Indiana Jones-ish, rather. And it's about an adventure to a lost kingdom in the heart of Africa, essentially. And it was a large influence on some other writers. For example, you can read an old Tolkien poem about the city Kor, which is the city in She. Galadriel is kind of obviously inspired by Aisha and in the novel She. So very good, actually. I thought it was very entertaining. Though I know some people have a hard time getting into it. Maybe try the audiobook if you have a hard time getting into it, because I think it was really fun, honestly. So I'm looking forward to reading more by Haggard. There is a lot more I want to read by him. So, and then I read That Hideous Strength, the 3rd and final book in the Cosmic or Space Trilogy by C.S.LEWIS. This one is like twice the length of the 2nd book. And, I've heard it called by my buddy Owen one of the great, British novels or whatever. And, it is pretty awesome. And it's got a lot of cool stuff in it, especially, for example, mentioning Numenor, Tolkien's Numenor, before the publication of The Lord of the Rings. It's pretty cool in that aspect. I did not enjoy it as much as the 2nd book, though, because I just think the 2nd book, as far as entertainment goes, is just more wild, and I like that apparently. So, but this one is definitely very cool. So, and I'll have something to say about it, of course. And then I read Pride and Prejudice. I think it was free on audiobook for Audible. So I was like, you know what, might as well. Why not? I thought it was very close to the movie with Keira Knightley, I think is the actress name. I don't know any actresses. And yeah, it was about as what I was expecting. I wasn't super entertaining, but it wasn't bad by any means. I think it's interesting that it's called a romance, and it is from, if I remember correctly, the early 19th century, which you could definitely call the Romantic period. And it's not very romantic, besides the fact that it's, you know, a lovey-dovey type of romance. You know, like what else? The other things that define like the Romantic period of art, it doesn't really have those things. You know, it's a domestic realism novel, really. Which, you know, that's fine, but whatever. It could have been way better if it had really stuck to the romanticism. Anyways, and then I read The Knight of the Swords by Michael Moorcock. This is the first Corum book, Corum being another aspect of the Eternal Champion, like Elric of Melniboné. This was really cool. I really liked this one. Corum is a lot more of a positive character, though he still has a lot of bad stuff happen to him. And this world is very weird, and I would say it's even weirder in some aspects than Elric. And then I read The Shadows of Dust, which is a standalone, like space fantasy, kind of like Spelljammer novel. Alec Hudson, I think, is the author. I'd have to double check. Took me a while to get through. It wasn't bad. The writing itself wasn't very engrossing, just to put it that way. So, but it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad at all. It definitely was a little refreshing. I think if you haven't had any exposure to Spelljammer and stuff like that, it'd be a lot more refreshing, a lot newer, a lot cooler. But I have experience with that stuff, so it didn't have that novelty, like cool factor to it. Anyways, so then I read Hand of Fire, which is the second. I think? No, Hand of Fire is the third book, sorry, in the Chandler Saga, which is a trilogy by Ed Greenwood. This is, again, I didn't find it as enjoyable as book 2, but it definitely, you know, does have a nice ending, a kind of bittersweet ending to the trilogy. So, and I'm a big fan of Ed Greenwood, so, you know, whatever. And then I read The Queen of Swords, which is the sequel to The Knight of Swords, second book in the Corum series. Has a very similar plot as the first book, but it is still very cool. Has a lot of weird stuff in it, very awesome. And then I read an unpublished book, so I won't really talk about it. It's not even like signed to be published, so it might never happen. But that was fine. And then I read The Green Pearl by Jack Vance, which is the second book in the Lee Ness trilogy. I didn't realize I read Soldier's Garden so long ago, because it's not in my autumn wrap-up. It must have been in my summer one. But The Green Pearl was pretty cool. I thought overall it was about as good as Soldier's Garden, maybe a little bit more entertaining. Not so tragic. Vance does some awesome things here, but I'll talk about that in a minute. And then I read Imaro, or Amaro, however the heck you're supposed to say it, by Charles Saunders. This is like the seminal work of Sword and Soul, which is a subgenre of sword and sorcery, which is African-inspired rather than European, like Eurocentric type of fantasy. So it was very cool. I wanted to read it so I could finally read the Open Acts, which is something I'm excited to read. I have a copy up there. But might as well have read it anyways, because now I only have like one more classic sword and sorcery author to get to, of the big ones, that is, and that is Carl Edward Wagner, which I didn't get to in autumn, but hopefully in the winter. And then I read The Dream Thief's Daughter. This is the first of the Dream Quest trilogy by Michael Moorcock. It is kind of a sequel to the Elric stories, but not really at the same time. They do have Elric in them. And of the three, The Dream Thief's Daughter is actually the best one, in my opinion. It's kind of a mixing of Elric and Von Beck, mostly, but there's also other things in there, like Hawkmoon, like Erikoze, Even things like Jerry Cornelius and Dancers at the End of Time. It's a big hodgepodge of the Eternal Champion stuff. So it's very different. And this one is kind of important that I would say you should have read Fortress of the Pearl before reading this stuff, which you likely would have anyways. But anyways, and then I read Nightside the Long Sun, Book 1 and Book of the Long Sun by Gene Wolfe. This is a pretty awesome novel. I don't have any of the other ones yet, so I haven't read any of the other ones with great sadness. But we'll see if Christmas brings some presents, I guess, along those lines. Really awesome. A sort of sequel to Book of the New Sun, which is sitting at my favorite series I've read this year so far. So, and then I read The King of Swords, which is probably my favorite of the 3 Corum stories. There is another Corum trilogy I have not read yet, but this one was fun. Again, a very similar plot to the first 2, but no harm there. And it does have a happy ending. You know, it's not so melancholy. Though it makes it all the more tragic in some ways because of that. Corum is a good guy. He's not Elric. So, and then I read The Skraeling Tree, another Moorcock book. So I read a lot of Moorcock in October. And this is the second book in the Dream Quest trilogy. And it involves a lot of like Nordic stuff from, you know, the Viking Age, and as well as like Native American stuff, which is an awesome mix. So, and not one you would expect, and I can't really explain it that well, so you should just go read the books if it sounds interesting to you. But yeah, it was pretty good. My least favorite of the trilogy, though. And then I read in November, going into November, I read 11 books. I read The Temptation of Elminster, which is the 3rd Elminster book. This one takes place several hundred years after the second one, so it's not really a sequel. You could read it as a standalone, and the temptation is not like a sexual temptation. It's more of a temptation of godhood. And this one is really stinking good. I love these Elminster novels by Ed Greenwood. I think they're, as so far of what I read by Greenwood, they're his best works. I love The Making of a Mage last year, and I read Elminster Myth Draenor, or I can't remember if I read it at the very beginning of this year or at the very end of last year. I read it around that time, though, and that one was really good as well. So Temptation of Elminster is just an awesome read, in my opinion. I'm sad that there's no novel set in between books 2 and 3, though, and I think if Ed ever got the chance, I think he would write novels in between there. He's got several hundred years to work with. But it is cool because this one takes place shortly after the fall of Myth Draenor, you know, so Myth Draenor is very much a theme in the second book. In fact, the raising of the Mythal, of it becoming Myth Draenor as opposed to Cormanther, happens in the second book. Spoiler alert, I guess, but you know, it's kind of a well-known Realms event anyways. But the second one is after Myth Draenor has fallen, so in some ways it's a little bit more melancholic. The world is definitely not the one from the previous Elminster books. And so then I read Mistress of the Night, which is by Dawn Bassingthwaite, which is like a tongue twister of a name, and then Dave Gross. And this one is pretty stinking cool. It's been a while. I wanted to read a book set in Sembia in the Forgotten Realms. I really love the Sembia series, and I love the Erebus Kale books. And Mistress of the Night is actually a decent book for fans of both. So it actually takes place after Dave Gross's book Black Wolf, which is part of the Sembia series, and before the Twilight War trilogy, which is the second Erebus Kale trilogy. And there's an important event that happens in this book, Mistress of the Night, that is, you know, it's important for the Twilight War trilogy, and one of the characters from Black Wolf is in this book. And so it takes place in Wan, Sembia, which is east of Ordulan, the capital, and I thought it was really stinking awesome. It deals a lot with Shar, the goddess Shar, and her sister, Saloon, the goddess of the moon. So, pretty awesome stuff, honestly. I really enjoyed that one. It's very short as well. So, and then I read The Hammer and the Blade, the first book of Ael and Nyx by Paul S. Kemp, who wrote the Erebus Kale book, speaking of Erebus Kale. So, really, really enjoyed this one. So, very good sword and sorcery, which Erebus Kale is very close to sword and sorcery. It kind of is in some parts and not in others, but it's very close all the way around. And I thought he would write great sword and sorcery, and he did. No surprise there. So I'm looking forward to reviewing that one in several months, probably, when that happens. And then I read The Scions of Shannara by Terry Brooks, of course. This is the first book in the heritage of Shannara, which is the first series after the original trilogy, which, were essentially standalones anyways. This one's more cohesive. There's less of Dark Lords and, more of other threats. So I have not read the 3 other books in the series yet, though hopefully I will soon. I did not enjoy this one as much as Elfstones, which is my, like the one I judge the other ones based off of, at least for right now, because it's just the best one that I've read of so far. There's a lot of Shannara. I would like to read more of it. I think Brooks gets too much hate. I will say things about Brooks sometimes, but I think he's not actually a bad writer. Elfstones is actually very enjoyable. And Science isn't bad. So I think The Druid is the next one, Druid of Shannara. Anyways, and then I read A Voyage to Arcturus, which is the November buddy read. This is a 1920 standalone philosophical sci-fi novel by David Lindsay. Very similar in some respects to C.S.LEWis' Paralandra. It's older than Paralandra. It's not Christian. It's rather Gnostic in a way. But very interesting, very wild, very adventurous. I really enjoyed this one. It's inspired some of my own writing, actually. I liked it a lot, so... that review will probably come sooner than some of these other ones, since that is the buddy read for November, so I should probably review that one sometime in December if I can fit it in. So, and then I read The Fortress of the Pearl for a chat, so reread, because I read it earlier this year, for a chat with some others. We did one for Elric Melnimene. The Fortress of the Pearl one didn't work out, so we'll see if we do one for just the volume Elric Melnimene, the recent ones from Saga Press. But I liked it more this time around. Yes, it is a good book, The Fortress of the Pearl. And then I read A Book of Blades, which is an anthology published by the Rogues in the House podcast. Sword and sorcery stories for the modern age, essentially. Very fun time. I actually wrote a review for this one. It might get published somewhere, that review. I'll record a review, obviously, but it won't come out for a while, so... and then I read, I read The White Wolf's Son, so the 3rd book in the Dream Quest trilogy. This one was pretty fun. This one's different because it's told in first person, I think, for the most part at least. I think all the Dream Quest trilogy books are actually told in first person, which, I failed to mention. But this one's told from the point of view of a 12-year-old girl named Una. It was interesting because she doesn't really... It's kind of hard to remember she's a 12-year-old girl sometimes. But it wasn't bad. It doesn't help that Samuel Rukin is the narrator, and Samuel Rukin is a guy. But, anyways, and then I read Maduk, the 3rd book in the Leonidas trilogy by Jack Vance. This book was awesome. There's a bunch of setup in the first 2 novels that makes this book really sneaking cool. The main character is essentially just Maduk, who is a very minor character in the first 2 books, which have several main characters in the first 2 books. With all that setup, you basically just get Maduk's story in this one. It is very good. If you're an Arthurian legend fan, or you haven't read any Jack Vance, this is more along the lines of epic fantasy than basically everything else he wrote. It's a trilogy. The books are thicker than most of the other things he wrote. So, yes, go and read the Leah Ness trilogy. It starts with Soldiers Garden, or sometimes it's just published as Leah Ness as well. So, and then I read The Eagle of the Ninth and The Silver Branch. I'll just put those together. Those are the last 2 books I read in November. Those are both by Rosemary Sutcliffe, who is an author I'm a huge fan of, have been for about a decade. She wrote one of my favorite books, Sword at Sunset, which I have been meaning to reread. Actually, I would like to be able to listen to it, but there's no audiobook for it, sadly. It is one of my favorite Arthurian tales. These are both Roman Britain tales, though. One takes place... I'm not quite sure, actually. Around the 1st century AD, probably. Another one takes place during the time of the Tetrarchs. They're both from the same family, kind of. The main characters are related, just distance by time. And they're pretty good. I like it. The Eagle of the Ninth actually was turned into the movie The Eagle. And I like this book. They're pretty straightforward as some things. Someone pointed out to me, they're kind of have stoic main characters. But in a sense, they're also written for, I've seen them marketed as kids' books. I think young adults would probably get quite a bit of enjoyment out of them. Now, as a young adult, I read Sword at Sunset, which is one of Sutcliffe's rare adult novels, and I enjoyed that just fine. Actually, I loved it. So these were not as good as Sword and Sunset, which is, it's just awesome. But they're very fun. And there was a third book in this Roman Britain trilogy called The Lantern Bearers. I will read that at some point. They're also called the Dolphin Ring Cycle, which includes more than 3 books, but I think those are written later. So I might read more of those as well, whatever ones there are, I guess, if I feel like it. So I do like Sutcliffe, so I don't have a problem with that. And then just real quick, I'll mention the 2 nonfiction books I finished all the way through. I think I actually read both of these in September. And the first one was The Anglo-Saxons by Mark Morris, if I'm remembering correctly. This was almost all refresher for me. I've never read this book, but I knew everything essentially in it. But it's nice to get refreshed, and the audiobook was actually pretty good. So Morris is he's a good historian. He has pretty popular books, though. He's rather popular compared to, I would say, most historians, as far as I'm aware. Anyways. And then I read the Vinland sagas also in September, which are 2 sagas about Vinland, which is the Vikings' little colony, if you want to call it that, on the North American continent. Yeah, those are very interesting, very short. I think both sagas put together in the Penguin Classics was 50 pages. There's a bunch of commentary before and after, but very fun to read as well. So, and then the winter wrap-up is gonna be good. You'll get it in 3 months. I'm already reading some good books, so yes, hopefully you'll look forward to that. But let me know what you have read recently. Let me know if you've read any of these or are interested in reading any of these. I realize I went over a lot of books, so if you're still at the end of this video, then God bless you. But anyways, this has been Liam's Lyceum. I'll catch you next time.